Kevin Daly. He is a senior economist at Goldman Sachs and the author of a paper called Handbook on Ireland. Well, Kevin says that Ireland does need to protect the banking system, but he also believes that an increase to its low corporate tax rate is unlikely. He said Ireland's growth forecasts are reasonably realistic, and he joins me now. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. If we have a look at first of all, what's happening with the banks? Clearly, the stress tests that allowed Anglo-Irish and Allied to pass during the summer don't look like they had too much credibility now. But what does Ireland begin to do with this banking sector? I mean, it's what's caused all these problems, and many people would have said that if Ireland had allowed Anglo to go to the wall some time ago, they wouldn't be where they are today.
Well, as Patrick Honohan has said, the Governor of the Irish Central Bank has said today, is that clearly Ireland needs a slimmed down banking sector that's more akin to the size and the shape of the economy. One of the problems that got Ireland into this crisis in the first instance was that the banking sector had expanded well beyond the size of that would be commensurate with the size of the Irish economy. And so that said, is that we think that some of the estimates of the banking losses that are being discussed in the press at the moment are overly pessimistic, and with the stability, assuming it is passed, with the stability provided by an EU IMF package, is that the situation in Ireland could stabilise relatively quickly.
It's quite nice to hear something so positive being said. There are those who say now that it's quite naive for Ireland to assume that they're going to be able to keep this 12.5% corporation tax, even though Brian Cowen was talking about it being a red line in negotiations. Perhaps Ireland really aren't in a position to negotiate that strongly at the moment. Do you think that they're going to get away with keeping 12.5%?
We think they probably will. I mean, it's not beyond the question that they may be forced to rise it, but we think ultimately they probably will get to maintain it. Why? Because it would be unusual for IMF conditionality in bailouts of this type to impose such specific tax changes. Normally the conditionality they impose is more of the general tax revenues, expenditure cuts variety, and they'll be sensitive to the accusation that they'll be invading Ireland's sovereignty and imposing a specific tax change of this type.
And could we see a classic fudge where it has there's a very small rise that's not going to send Google and Microsoft scuttling elsewhere, but allows Germany and France to say, look, we did have some impact on the tax system? Possibly.
I mean, it is a possibility, but I think it's more likely that the focus of the adjustments will be on, as I say, things like the property tax that has been introduced in Ireland, a wealth tax that is likely to be introduced in Ireland, and further expenditure cuts as well.
Now, looking at, we've had quite a lot of information out of Greece today, and looking at the issues that are happening there are some parallels that can be drawn. One of which is the fiscal austerity that's been put in place by the budget if it goes through on the 7th of December. You know, that can actually be very difficult for Ireland in terms of growth. And is there a concern that Ireland just isn't going to be able to get out of this bind with the kind of budgetary austerity that's needed? Well,
I mean, it's certainly a common view that the fiscal austerity that has been introduced to date has caused the crisis, whereas, you know, our own view would be more that it is a consequence rather than a cause of the crisis. If you look at the pattern of Irish GDP fell by 4% in 2008, it fell by another 9% in 2009, and it was towards the end of that period that the fiscal austerity measures were introduced, by which stage in GDP this year looks like stabilising or indeed maybe slightly higher. So it's difficult to argue that, you know, given the timing of the fiscal austerity measures, the fact that they came after the collapse in GDP, that they in some sense caused the collapse in GDP.
Now, Portugal's already saying that it doesn't need any help in giving those assurances. It does sound a bit like Ireland a couple of weeks ago. Do you think they're going to need to use some emergency funds? I think
it is a significant risk, and one of the issues that Ireland has faced and Portugal faces is that as a very small economy, even if the fundamentals are better than many people give it credit for, it's very easy to be shouted down by the market, if I can put it that way. So these things, when you're with small economies, they can take a momentum of their own. So Portugal is in a difficult position, but it's good news, therefore, that the institutions are in place, such as the EFSF, to provide the security that is there required. I mean, a lot of people believe that the current crisis could be the breaking of the Eurozone. It's also possible that it could be the making of the Eurozone.
Do you believe it could be the breaking of the Eurozone?
I don't. We don't. And we think that, indeed, actually, through this, is that a lot of the institutions are being put in place that could, in the long term, help to stabilise the Eurozone against the effects of crises such as these as and when they arise.
Okay. Daly from Goldman Sachs, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much.